What is up, my beautiful gemstones? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing people who were abducted by the Fae. I talked about fairy abductions at length in my very first book, Missing the Fae Theory, but back then, in all actuality, I honestly had no idea how big of a thing this really was. Meaning, how many stories are floating around out there of this sort of thing happening to people? For the most part, I've been under the impression that once someone is taken by the Fae, there's almost no returning to tell the tale, at least in our modern day. I recently came across information that, in my opinion, proves that initial theory of mine wrong, and I was somewhat shocked at how many people were taken, and then came back to talk about it. Without anything else, let's jump right in. I would be remiss in my duties of bringing information about the Fae and the missing to you all if I didn't at least talk a little bit at first about the changelings. And guys, for more information on anything we discuss in this video, please feel free to purchase my book on the subject to get a more depth information about all of it, because I basically covered everything about the Fae, at least a little bit, in that book. Just for a simple definition, a fairy changeling is a Fae creature that's left behind when the Fae come into your home or otherwise steal your healthy human baby or child. It's like a placeholder entity, one that looks almost exactly like the human being who is taken, but there's normally something off or wrong with it that people who know the human well will immediately notice. So like a mother and her newborn child, or a parent and their toddler. This is also not to mention that they aren't usually the healthiest of creatures. I hadn't come across any fairies leaving a changeling behind when they abducted adult humans though, but I knew it did happen sometimes. I just hadn't been able to find a case to point to. In March of 1895, a woman named Bridget Cleary disappeared from her home in Ireland, and after an extensive search, she was found deceased not too far from her home. Initially, the Irish police thought that her husband had been the one to kill her, along with some other members of her family. They ended up being right, but the culprit list was extensive, so I'll list who the alleged killers were here now. There was her husband, Michael Cleary, her own father, Patrick Boland, her aunt, Mary Kennedy, and 4 of her cousins whose names were Patrick, William, James, and Michael Kennedy, and another cousin named John Dunn. These killers were all questioned separately, and they all told the very same, very bizarre story. According to all of these people, the real Bridget was abducted by fairies, and the Fae had left a changeling behind in her place. They said that they realized this when Bridget, or quote, the creature pretending to be Bridget, end quote, became very sick suddenly and for no apparent reason. These family members and Bridget's husband decided to tie up and torture the changeling in order to get it to tell them where the real Bridget had been taken and how they could go about getting her back. However, before they got their answers, they said that it had died from its injuries. Obviously, the authorities didn't believe a word of their story, and so they were all charged with Bridget's murder. I'm not really sure what to make of this one, guys, and that's where it ends. But I will say it's not the most believable case, because normally, as in 99.9% of the time, the Fae leave behind a changeling in place of an infant or a very young child, and the human is taken away, never to be seen or heard from again in most cases. Now, they're saying they recognized immediately that this was a changeling creature, but I don't know. I mean, I guess depending on the time and the place, which in the 1800s in Ireland, maybe it wasn't that uncommon to think that someone that you knew had been replaced by a changeling creature, right? How would you go about getting information from it? At the end of the day, though, I do believe maybe they were misled by their own groupthink. Let me know what you think about that one. There's also the account from the 1909 edition of the Preston Herald about a woman who also lived in Ireland named Annie McIntyre that talks about something similar having happened to her. It said, quote, Annie McIntyre, a venerable County Derry woman, has a sublime faith in the fairies. When being examined at a meeting of the Limavady Pension Committee as to her age, she fixed the time of her birth as Halloween in 1839, giving for her recollection of the fact the startling reason that she had been, quote unquote, stolen by the fairies. In reply to the chairman, the woman said that she was as certain of her abduction by the fairies as she was alive. After carrying off the infant, she continued, the wee people indulged in revels and dancing in the wood at Carrowqueel. which were fortunately overheard by her brother when returning from Cardenay. The brother had a book, a Bible, difficult to see the fairies being frightened off by a penny dreadful, which he threw into the wood and scattered the fairies when he lifted his baby sister in his arms and carried her back in triumph. Upon further questioning, the witness said her mother's relatives were overjoyed at her safe return and gave themselves up to feasting and merriment. This was the only incident by which the witness was able to determine her age, of which no record appeared in the census of 1841 or that of 1851, end quote. Now, we've covered this story before here on this channel, and I might have even talked about it in the book too. Traditionally, it is infants who are the most targeted by the Fae for abductions, or back in the day, in order to protect babies and small children, people would sprinkle holy water onto them, and sometimes they would even hang iron rods or bars over their cribs as well. So what this woman was saying was that she was almost abducted by the Fae. She was being carried off when her brother came across them and threw the Bible at them. Now, here's what I don't understand. When they carry off an infant, they leave a changeling in its place. So, what did they do with the changeling? I guess I should have looked back on the original story, because I did cover this in more depth in a different video about people being abducted by the Fae. So also, grown adults are still known to this day to carry even small pieces of real iron into the woods with them in order to keep the Fae away from them. And I do suggest doing this in my book, and I give many reasons as to why this is important when you're going in the woods, especially and particularly where you feel there could be fairy creatures. The idea in this particular case was that the woman looked much younger than she really was, which is another common denominator of changelings, because being of Fae blood, they live much longer than regular humans. So, is she saying that she actually is the changeling? Why does she look so much younger? I don't think so. I think she was just saying that she was touched by the Fae. And usually when that happens, you do kind of tend to de-age. You know, like the wrinkles will disappear and you'll go back to looking like you're in your 20s when you're in your 40s. Do you know what I'm saying? At least that's the legend anyway. 20th century fairy researcher W.Y. Evans said, quote, "The fairies were wont to take infants and their mothers, and many precautions were taken to safeguard them till purification and baptism took place, when the fairy power became ineffective, placing iron on the bed, burning leather in the room, giving mother and child the milk of a cow who had eaten of a mouthan, pearlwort, Pinguicula vulgaris, a plant of virtue, and similar means were taken to ensure their safety. If the watching women neglected these precautions, the mother or child or both were spirited away to the fairy bower." End quote. However, this doesn't always work 100% of the time, as we will see in our next encounter. A witness only known as Grace came forward on the site Irish Central and told this story. Quote, "Don't believe in fairy abductions? My granny would have a sit down with you and soon set you straight. From the very day of her birth, Granny's parents carefully lay their iron fire poker across the basket she slept in. They were believers, you see, in the good people. Well, wasn't everyone back then, though? But times have changed and now there are fewer who believe. Who knows, maybe the good people like it that way. My granny thinks so, and she says she would know. Quote, I've lived one foot in our world and the other foot in theirs, end quote, so she says. You see, when Granny was but a few months old, the good people tried to steal her away. Without a drop of whiskey on her breath, she'll tell you that she was asleep in her wee basket when there was a commotion out back of her parents' cottage. They lived in County Limerick at the time. It was a farm with mainly sheep, she says, and anyway, all hell had broken loose between sheep and dogs, and Granny's mam and pop upped and ran outside to see the damage. As it happened, there was nothing to see. Nothing at all. It had been nothing but bluster, for the sheep and dogs were only calm and dozy, which was strange in itself. Granny's mam was pretty canny, and she hightailed it back to the cottage to find Granny still wrapped tight in her blanket, lying at the threshold at the front door, fast asleep, across the room from her basket. When she was older, Granny was told by her parents that the good people had distracted them so they could steal her away, for she was touched, having one blue eye and one green, you see. Only they couldn't get her out from the cottage on account she'd been baptized. Granny will tell you the iron bar did nothing to keep the good people from reaching into her basket, and what's more, it wasn't true, her being baptized. It's what her parents told anyone who asked, but in truth, she was yet to be baptized, and only a day or two after the visit, as Granny calls it, her parents took her on the quiet to the priest to get the job done. So we can only guess that the good people dropped Granny to the ground when they heard her ma'am approaching. I think Granny enjoys telling the story and wears it as a kind of badge, actually. It is remarked by many who have known Granny that she has lived a charmed life on account of her touch by the good people. There could be something to that. She's nearly 100 years old after all and as bright and feisty as ever before. End quote. Heterochromia, my son has it, one eye one color, one eye the other. It's pretty rare, and there are a lot of people who do believe that it happens by way of fae or some other sort of mythical creature's blood coursing through your veins. I'm his mom. That would make sense. It's true, too, that oftentimes just coming into contact with the fae will have amazing and very good effects on our human spirit and on our bodies, and it should be no different here, given you believe this woman's Granny's story, because they saw something special in her that they wanted enough that they were going to go ahead and abduct her, but then were scared off by the approaching sounds of someone coming. I believe some of their magic was instilled in her that day, and more than likely it's why she went on to live, quote-unquote, a charmed life, so to speak. Of course, it isn't always true that babies are the ones taken by the fae, but it is more than usually, almost always, someone who is at least very young. The encounters I like to read through the most are of people who say they encountered the fae and lived to tell the tale of it all after they came back. An encounter from 1755 revolves around a fairy circle, and I found this one very interesting to say the least. This happened on a farm near the Vale of Neath in New South Wales. In that year on the farm, two men named Rhys ap Morgan and Llewellyn Walter were walking back to the farm one night when Rhys stopped in his tracks and told Llewellyn that he could hear the faint sound of music playing, but that he couldn't quite pinpoint where it was coming from. Llewellyn couldn't hear anything, so Rhys told him to just continue on back to the farm as he was going to go and search out the beautiful melody that he was hearing. He wanted to talk to whoever was playing or making the music. Llewellyn thought that perhaps Rhys was just trying to get out of all of the work that they still had left to do on the farm that day, and he thought he was making up hearing the music in the first place because he didn't hear anything. Finally, Llewellyn went back to the farm and left Rhys to his own devices. Once the morning came, Rhys still hadn't returned to the farm, so Llewellyn told their boss what had happened the night before when he had last seen Rhys and what had transpired. There was a large-scale search of the area, and they even went and looked in the local alehouse, but couldn't find the missing man or any traces of him anywhere at all. Eventually, everyone thought that Llewellyn had something to do with Rhys's disappearance, and this went on with a cloud of suspicion hanging over this poor guy's head for an entire year, but with no one finding any clues as to where the missing man had ended up or what had happened to him. A local farmer got wind of the story one day, and he thought that perhaps the fae could have had something to do with the disappearance, and so he asked Llewellyn to take him to the last place he had seen Rhys, the place in the forest where he had last seen him, where he had last left him, and where Rhys heard the music. Llewellyn did just that, and once they got there, the local farmer told everyone that the spot was a fairy circle and that the fae indeed did have something to do with Rhys's disappearance after all. He told them that Rhys had been snatched away within the circle, and the moment he did so, Llewellyn suddenly heard the sound of haunting and beautiful music, a sound which no one else, including the farmer, could hear. He heard the sound of a harp, specifically, and when the farmer looked down, he saw that Llewellyn's foot was partially within the fairy circle. One by one, everyone present there with them began to place a foot within the circle, and one by one, they started to hear the beautifully played harp music. And not only that, but they all claimed to be able to hear the sounds of children's laughter all around them as well. Within a matter of seconds, they all started to see what looked like small children or child-sized figures dancing around. With them was Rhys ap Morgan, the missing man who had vanished from that spot just a year earlier. Llewellyn saw the opportunity to grab Rhys and pull him out of the circle, and so that's what he did. Rhys was incredulous, and he was really annoyed, and he told his friend that he had only just gotten there and he wanted to stay and dance just a little bit longer. He said that he had only been there for 5 minutes and was having way too much fun to leave just then. He had no idea that he had been gone for so long, and he had no memory of dancing or any other time spent with the fae except for the last 5 minutes leading up to when Llewellyn pulled him out. He begrudgingly and angrily, I would say, or more like being annoyed, left with Llewellyn, the local farmer, and all of the other people who had gone out there to try and find him. And the next morning, when they all went back to the circle, they found that it had been filled in with tiny footprints and dirt, the footprints being the size of a regular human being's thumb. After he left the circle, Reese's health deteriorated rapidly, and he died just a short while later. What happened here then? No one really knows. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, because I do have some ideas. One account from the book Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries by that same author from before, W.Y. Evans Wentz, happened in 1910 and revolves around a little boy who was out with his twin brother and a cousin, and he claims at that time that they were almost abducted by a group of fairies. The encounter reads, quote, "One day, just before sunset in midsummer, and I, a boy then, my brother and cousin and myself were gathering bilberries, whortleberries, up by the rocks at the back of here, when all at once we heard music. We hurried round the rocks, and there we were within a few 100 feet of 6 or 8 of the gentle folk, and they were dancing. When they saw us, a little woman dressed in all red came running out from them toward us, and she struck my cousin across the face with what seemed to be a green rush. We ran for home as hard as we could, and when my cousin reached the house, she fell dead. Father saddled a horse and went for Father Ryan. When Father Ryan arrived, he put a stole about his neck and began praying over my cousin and reading psalms and striking her with the stole, and in that way he brought her back. He said if she had not caught hold of my brother, she would have been taken forever." End quote. We talked about this one in previous videos. I've talked about this in live streams, and I went in a little more in depth on this one in the book Missing the Faith Theory. So as you can see, some of these encounters are a bit harrowing, to say the least, and it goes to further prove my point that it's not all fun and games when it comes to the Fae folk. Another encounter from that same book is from a man who refers to the Fae as the Gentry, and he tells of a terrifying encounter he had with them when he was out one day near a place called Ben Bulben. He said, quote, "When I was a young man, I often used to go out into the mountains over there to fish for trout or to hunt, and it was in January on a cold, dry day while carrying my gun that I and a friend with me, as we were walking around Ben Bulben, saw one of the Gentry for the first time. I knew who it was, for I had heard the Gentry described ever since I could remember, and this one was dressed in blue with a headdress adorned with what seemed to be frills. When he came up to us, he said to me in a sweet and silvery voice, quote, 'The seldomer you come to this mountain, the better. A young lady here wants to take you away,' end quote. Then he told us not to fire off our guns because the Gentry dislike being disturbed by the noise. And he seemed to be like a soldier of the Gentry on guard. As we were leaving the mountains, he told us not to look back, and we didn't. Another time I was alone trout fishing in nearly the same region when I heard a voice say, 'It is barefooted and fishing.' Then came a whistle-like music and a noise like the beating of a drum, and soon one of the Gentry came and talked with me for an hour. He said, quote, 'Your mother will die in 11 months, and do not let her die unanointed,' end quote. And she did die within 11 months. As he was going away, he warned me, quote, 'You must be back in the house before sunset. Do not delay, do not delay. They can do nothing to you until I get back to the castle,' end quote. As I found out afterwards, he was going to take me, but hesitated because he did not want to leave my mother alone. After these warnings, I was always afraid to go into the mountains, but lately I have been told I could go if I take a friend with me," end quote. So I would say this sounds like a child's fanciful story, except it was written, presumably, by an older man. So I'm not really sure what to make of it, but more than likely his mother, and thereby he, had Fae blood. I wonder, though, why he wasn't taken after his mother died. But then again, how would we really know if he was or not, as there's no follow-up or continuation to this story? So basically what he was saying was, the Fae wanted to take me, he wanted to take me, but my mother was dying, and she didn't know, and she would have been left alone had I not been there. So why didn't they come back after she died? Or I know that, I'm pretty sure he said that he went back into the woods after his mom died, so why didn't they take him then? So one of the most interesting things about fairy abductions, in my opinion, is the missing time element to many of the stories. Actually, this comes across in the majority of cases where people end up going somewhere other or another after being taken or lured by the Fae. Now, this is so fascinating to me because it directly correlates, or seemingly so, to the missing time that so many abductees experience when dealing with extraterrestrials as well. However, and despite that information, there's never been any real connection I can make between the two types of entities, but the more I look, then the more I really do think that there's something there, just that I haven't figured out what it is yet. Here's a report from the Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries. I think it's a book or a magazine. I'm not sure, but in this publication, there's a place that's called Fairyland. And in this place, time runs differently than it does here in our dimension here on Earth. This also rings a bell with me, so to speak, because of the fact that in all other dimensions I am aware of, from all the stories I've come across and that have been sent to me about people who accidentally or otherwise found themselves in those places, Earth and our third dimension is the only place where time is linear, and it honestly it doesn't work that way anywhere else. Time is only linear here. According to this publication as well, this place called Fairyland also has its own very interesting way of making it so anyone who visits there can't, or at least has a very hard time speaking about what happened to them during their time there. The publication explains, quote, persons in a short trance state of 2 or 3 days duration are said to be away with the fairies enjoying a festival. The festival may be very material in its nature, or it may be purely spiritual. Sometimes one may thus go to fairy for an hour or two, or one may remain there for 7, 14, or 21 years. The mind of a person coming out of Fairyland is usually a blank as to what has been seen and done there. Another idea is that the person knows well enough all about Fairyland, but is prevented from communicating that knowledge. A certain woman of whom I knew said she had forgotten all about her experiences in Fairy, but a friend who heard her objected and said she did remember and just said she wouldn't tell. A man may remain awake at night to watch one who has been to Fairyland to see if that one holds communication with the Fae. Others say in such a case that the fairies know you are on the alert and will not be discovered, end quote. Interesting to say the least. Let me know what you think on this in the comments as well, because it just sounds like what most of us in this community who are aware of such things, it's like in most other dimensions and realms, with the realm of the Fae being no exception. We lose time, and when we get back, we either can't or won't, or are like literally physically unable to talk about it. Like in a lot of the cases I talk about in my newest books, Gone Volume 1 and 2 actually, of people disappearing, coming back, and being like, I don't know. How about this case from Ancient Origins, which relates the very bizarre ordeal of a woman who said she nearly disappeared into what she called a fairy fort, which we usually know to be some sort of mound, a cairn of rough stones, or even boulders, think boulder fields like that. And she knew what we also do nowadays, and that's that those specific types of places have a special significance to the Fae in that it draws the creatures to it. The report says, quote, finally, as an example of this darker aspect to fairy encounters, this account from the Irish Folklore Archives demonstrates the upset and the confusion which many feel before they can even speak about what they believe happened to them. In this case, a family happens to live close to an ancient fairy fort, and one morning, as a woman is using a spinning wheel, she notices a tiny person standing by the door of the house. When the woman stood up and walked to the door to investigate, she was taken away by a group of small people. When the family arrived home and noticed their aunt had vanished, they searched everywhere in the vicinity but found no sign of her. They searched the drains, the ditches, and even the fairy fort itself. It was on the 3rd day of her disappearance that one of the family was walking by the fort when they saw the aunt kneeling next to it. She had vanished while holding a carving knife, and this was stuck in the ground next to her. The aunt could not speak for days after her return, and it was only then that the family learned of her fairy abduction. End quote. Sneaky, sneaky, those little devils. Guys, there are more stories of people who say that they've been abducted by the Fae, or who say that they've at least come across them in the woods. And that was the whole premise for my first book ever, Missing the Fae Theory. Because there are so many species of fairies, and they are constantly mating and intermingling the species, not only with other fairies, but with human beings and whatever else from all over the world as well. There's new species popping up all over the place every single day, more than likely. Therefore, and for so many other reasons, I feel like unless we each go there individually and see for ourselves that they exist, whether in our own woodlands or in their dimension, we're never really going to know about all of it or what's true and what isn't. However we might get there to see them, there will always be people who believe in everything under the sun that we discuss here on this channel and across this community in general, who will still draw a very hard line at the belief in the Fae folk. But it does lead for some interesting conversations and really great content nonetheless. That's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content, if you enjoyed hanging out with me. Spread the love by sharing this video. Subscribe if you haven't already, and make sure your notification bell is turned on and to all so you receive every single notification from me but from my shorts to the pre-recordeds like this video, all my live streams, and everything and anything else in between. Check out the description box for some important links, ways to donate to the channel, PayPal, Cash App, my Patreon, become a member, my Amazon wish list gift link. The links to every single one of my books on Amazon is in the description box, and you can find all my books on Kindle, paperback, and at Audible. If you would like an autographed copy, GemmaJadeParanormal at gmail.com. Before making the purchase, you can email me to send me in your own personal encounters. For any other correspondence at all, please send me in those personal encounters. By the way, I love doing listener encounters, but for any other correspondence at all, GemmaJadeParanormal at gmail.com is the email I'd like you to use if you're interested in personal intuitive oracle readings. I offer a variety of kinds and a variety of subjects. Don't forget the live streams. The schedule for the live streams updated. I did go back and look, and I was like, oh my gosh, this isn't even the schedule anymore, and I updated it. So the description box has been updated with the proper and new information as well, so go and check that out there. Also, I am on Rumble. I'm about to do my introduction video for that. It'll probably be out by the time you guys see this. And I am on TikTok, GemmaJadeYT on TikTok. I need 1,000 followers to be able to go live there, and I really think I'm going to do super well once I can go live there. So if you are willing to get on TikTok, I know some of you guys like draw a hard line at TikTok, and I get that. I'm also reposting whatever I post on TikTok here to Facebook on the shorts. So please be sure and support those, even if you can't get over on TikTok to support me there. If you can, I would really appreciate it. Like I said, I need 1,000 followers before I can go live and make any money over there. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. If nobody told you today, you're awesome. You got this. Don't let anyone bring you down with their negativity. And remember that toxic and lower vibrating people are always going to want to see you feeling like you're less than. Don't give them that supply. Don't give them the option of putting you in that energetic space. I got your back. I believe in you. Always go in grace. Smile at a stranger. And I'll see you guys next time.